When I was a kid growing up in Dixon and Vacaville, way back in the 1990s and 2000s, I didn't even know what college was. I was a big basketball head, so all I knew about college was that it's where NBA players come from. I grew up a fan of Michael Jordan and remember so I knew he played at North Carolina, but I didn't know what else he did there. Even though I grew up with no idea what college was, it may shock you to learn that I was actually considered a gifted student in elementary school, mostly due to my math and art skills, but more so my math skills. I even had one of those Matilda moments in my third grade class.
You'll be able to do any multiplication, whether it's 2 times 7?
14.
Very good. Or 13 times 379.
4,927.
I beg your pardon?
The scene from my third grade class wasn't nearly as impressive as the Matilda scene, but the setup was similar. The teacher told us that in the future we would be able to multiply larger numbers like 56 times 3. She then asked the class to guess the answer, and for the next 15 seconds, the entire class started guessing answers that weren't even close. I remember one kid even saying 100, and 8-year-old me thought, if 50 only goes into 100 twice, then 56... And that's when I lost patience and just said out loud, it's 168. The teacher said, that's correct, and gave me that Miss Honey look, and the class got silent and stared at me like I was from outer space. Oh, and fun fact, the actress who played Matilda and I were born on the same day. When I was in 6th grade, my grandma dated this African French man who was really into higher education and saw potential in my math skills. He asked me where I wanted to go to college, and aside from the popular basketball schools, the only schools I had heard of at the time were UC Davis and Sac State, so I just said those. He responded, "Why don't you want to go to Stanford or MIT?" And I just shrugged because I didn't know how to articulate to him that I don't know what a Stanford or MIT are. It wasn't until probably my senior year of high school that I really learned that college is a place of higher education that you can pursue after high school. At the time, I was a big UCLA basketball fan, so UCLA was my dream school. But by the time I really learned what college was, it was way too late for me to consider anything close to my dream school as a possibility, because in order to get into a highly reputable school, you need to be groomed from a relatively early age to do so. I was a terrible student throughout middle school and a terrible student throughout the first half of high school and even into the beginning of 11th grade until a counselor told me that I was in danger of needing a 5th year to graduate. Hearing that flipped a switch in me that unlocked the honor student that was always locked away somewhere in there. At the end of 11th grade, my teachers pulled me aside and told me how amazed they were at the turnaround. I rejoined the track team for the first time since 9th grade and began taking sports more seriously, and I carried this new scholar-athlete persona through 12th grade and into graduation. But remember when I said it was way too late for me to consider anything close to my dream school as a possibility, because in order to get into a highly reputable school, you need to be groomed from a relatively early age to do so? It turns out that if you combine 3 A- semesters with 5 D average semesters, you don't exactly have your pick of colleges to go to. Not to mention that the thought of applying to colleges never even crossed my mind because, again, I was never groomed for higher education. In fact, this town that I grew up in is a conservative military town where the most common plans for after graduation are some combination of getting a low-paying job right away, starting a family right away, joining the military, or enrolling into the local community college. Solano Community College seemed like a viable option until I learned that the community colleges in Sacramento had track and field teams, unlike this one. My mom lived in Sacramento, relatively close to Sac City College, so I moved in with her and enrolled there as a math major. My first year at Sac City was rough. I was a student from a low-income background who couldn't convince anyone to hire a teenager with no work experience and no personal connections, even though I basically only applied to grocery stores, fast food chains, and gas stations. So I depended heavily on financial aid. My second semester, I was academically crippled when the school's financial aid office fell behind by months. I also had a terrible freshman track season because I was never able to adjust from my high school sprinting background to the longer events my college coaches switched me to. So I struggled both inside and outside of the classroom. Many of my struggles snowballed into my second year when I would drop out halfway through the fall semester. I did manage to find low paying part time work, and over the next year and a half, I bounced around between annoying low paying jobs, academic comeback attempts, athletic comeback attempts, cities, and family members who would let me live with them rent free. I had no direction until one especially depressing night at work as a cashier caused me to wonder where my life was going. During a slow moment, I just stood at my register and asked myself, why was I working an annoying job that pays me just barely enough to get to and from work? Why was I allowing myself to be bossed around by people I should be managing? And where is this all going? So in spring 2008, I decided to give school one last shot. I chose to major in fine arts because I believed it would give me the quickest path to completion and transferring to a university. Not only did this academic path enable me to rediscover honor student Raymond from the end of high school, but it also enabled me to rediscover a creative side of me that I never previously gave disciplined attention to. It's one thing to be casually creative, it's another thing to have your drawings, paintings, and photographs graded by professors. In addition to blitzing out perfect and near perfect semesters, I returned to the track in spring 2009 for my sophomore season. It wasn't anything special, but at least I was no longer terrible by junior college athlete standards. The real highlight of the semester was the academic attention I was getting from universities in the form of interest letters, and two of them caught my attention.
Cornell is a good school, and I want to better myself through higher education. If it makes Andy angry, so be it.
The best things of the moment were outside the rectangle of Columbia. The best things of all human history and thought were inside.
As flattered as I was by the Cornell letter, I ignored it. I knew someone whose friend visited, and the high temperature during the day of her visit was 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Not to mention that Cornell was supposedly not the best school for students with depression, and junior college Raymond was not exactly a happy person. Which is a great segue into the Columbia letter. I did apply to Columbia University, and you know what? They rejected me. According to them, everything about my profile looked good except that my essay was too negative, which is right on brand for me. Not to bitterly pile on to the elitist reputation of Ivy League schools, but Ivy League schools basically want students who've already won at life, whereas public schools are more likely to see character in your sob story upbringing. So that's a pro tip for those of you who are considering applying to colleges. And yes, Columbia University provides contact information for us rejects who are morbidly curious as to why we were not good enough for them. But before the end of spring 2009, I received acceptance letters from UC Davis and UC Santa Barbara. Initially, I decided to stay local and enroll into Davis while possibly continuing to live with my family. But then one night, my family got into a heated argument that led me to believe I needed a change of scenery, so I switched my intention and officially accepted the Santa Barbara offer. However, I would not get that change in scenery because it turns out there was one University of California requirement I did not fulfill. If you followed the story to this point, it might be tricky to guess what the requirement was until I gave you the irony hint in this sentence. It was the math requirement. What's that, Raymond? It was the math requirement? Somehow, someway, the student who enrolled 4 years prior as a math major fulfilled every requirement necessary to transfer to a University of California school except for the math requirement? This was quite devastating to someone who felt eternally miserable in junior college, that I had seemingly made it all the way to the finish line after years of grinding only to be told, nope, you have to wait another year because you have one more class you need to take, and this also happens to be the only requirement we don't allow students to take the summer before fall enrollment. I attempted to make the best of summer 2009 by participating in Second Saturday to get more attention for my art, and to lean into what felt like the beginning of a mildly promising modeling career. When fall 2009 came, I enrolled into a statistics class that fulfilled the University of California math requirement. Coincidentally, it was taught by a professor who himself graduated from a University of California school. More on that later. Having exhausted all of my financial aid eligibility, I could not afford the required textbook for this statistics class, so throughout the semester I was just barely hanging on to a C. I think this gave the professor a false impression of my competency, which became apparent in a conversation we had as we walked toward the parking lot. I was compelled to flag him down after a class in which he mentioned he graduated from UC Berkeley, a school I was beginning to show some interest in. As we're walking toward the parking lot, the conversation was friendly until I mentioned my interest in UC Berkeley. The professor's face went from smile to scowl, and in the most dismissive way anyone can say anything, he said, "You have to be pretty sharp to get into that school." After I explained to him the situation with the textbook and that I could just write that context in the application essay, he responded, "Well, then it will just sound like you're making excuses." At that point, we reached the parking lot, and he walked off with that air of disgust that one does when they're clearly annoyed by someone's presence. As I stood there and watched him disappear into the parking lot, I thought to myself, I'm going to remember this conversation. Initially, that conversation did stick in my head for the wrong reasons. Because having just barely survived the fall 2009 semester humbled any inkling I had of getting into a top school. But when spring 2010 came, I needed something to do while getting rejected for every job I applied for. So being the math lover that I am, I enrolled into a pre-calculus class for fun. Once again, I didn't have the textbook, but it didn't matter this time because I had already fulfilled the transfer requirement I needed. However, about halfway through the semester, I realized something. I was sitting on 55 units, and the class I was taking was 5 units. At the time, Berkeley was the only UC campus I knew of that enforced a hard 60 units transfer minimum. So I contacted the UC Berkeley Office of Admissions, and a person responded by confirming that I would indeed be eligible to transfer if I completed my current pre-calculus class with a grade of B or higher. It was around the midpoint of the semester, and I was writing a big D. Yeah, I could have said that another way. Actually, it was a D minus. Anyway, desperately looking for an affordable version of the textbook, I discovered a place called Amazon.com. No, seriously, this is how I first discovered Amazon, and this textbook is listed as the first order I ever made on the website. After receiving that textbook, I aced exam after exam after exam to rally all the way from a D minus to a B plus heading into the final. I needed a 96 on the final to finish the class with an A, but more importantly, I needed just a 54 on the final to finish the class with a B. No problem, right? Well, on the day of my final, my bus did not show up. It just didn't come. I walked a mile to another bus line to get to campus with just enough time to do about 40% of the test. When I got home, I emailed the professor to explain what happened, and he mercifully told me that he would allow me to retake the final, but it would be a harder version and I would need to come to his earlier class. The following morning, in anticipation of never having to sit in another junior college class again, I enthusiastically rushed to that earlier class to take the final. I needed a 54, and I earned a 72.